All right. This is Tim Kaine balancing friction. And I think he's talking about friction points or pain points, which are just points where your player experiences some sort of, in this case, friction or pain that can be both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing when it's moderated and controlled. It's a bad thing when it's uncontrolled pain points, right? Where it's something that you don't want to cause pain, like a menu. Usually you don't want pain points in menus. You want pain points in the players being able to get over obstacles, right? You need to put challenges in the way of the player, which can cause friction or pain, and then the player can overcome that challenge by strategizing, by learning, by becoming skillful. Tetris menus. Yeah, you don't want pain points or friction in your menus usually. But we'll see what Tim has to say.
Hi, everyone. It's me,
Hi
Tim.
Tim.
Today, I want to talk about balancing friction.
Yes.
And this comes from a question from Padoni Rosso. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who asked, can you talk about balancing friction in RPGs and games? It seems like quite the complex thing to do when the friction points for the player and how they're distributed around the gameplay loop will most likely influence other already complex systems in the game. For example, I'm thinking about pacing, both the storytelling and the alternation of action and non-action phases. I'm also talking about game economy, as talked about in the encumbrance video, and the full effect of friction points
It's a lot.
seems to
It's a
me
lot of
like something
points.
you can only fully evaluate when the game is all playable, especially when the crossover with those other systems I was referring to earlier is taken into account. Oh wait, there's
There's more to that. I mean, I can already say though that sometimes yes, sometimes friction points will only be visible when you playtest. That's why you playtest. That's also why you prototype, because you can evaluate friction points much earlier. However, game designers, our job as designers, is to think of those pain points before they're even prototyped. That's like the first, you are the first line of defense, is where you say, yeah, your idea is great, but it would be frustrating for the player to interact with A, B, or C in the way that you've presented it, right? That game designers, our job is to anticipate those pain points or anticipate those design holes, and then we can try to figure it out on paper before we go to prototype. Then we prototype, we evaluate how that feels and whether or not anything that doesn't feel complete is presenting pain points, and then we can iterate from there, and then we develop the final thing. Of course, the final solution for a game system or a feature may, you may only see those or feel those pain points once all the features are tied together, right? The pacing might be off. It's just, it can occur at any point. It can occur at any point. If it didn't, then you could reliably prototype a game and reduce all pain points before the game ever goes into production, but you can't. So, how do you minimize that? Intuition and playtesting.
more. Do you have any trick or story you can tell about this, about how you tackle this problem along your career? That's a good question. It's a very long
It's a
question.
very
It's
long
kind of a
question.
detailed question. I'm going to talk about it. I think I have a relatively simple answer, but some of you aren't going to like implementing it. But I will get there. So let's talk about balancing friction. Let me start with first. I had a video on encumbrance when
You've talked about
this person asked
encumbrance.
the question. Since then, I have another video on encumbrance. So, encumbrance part one and part two are linked below. I recommend you look at them because encumbrance is a perfect example of a friction point.
By the way, if you're on YouTube, we did react to both of those, so take a look in the playlist, and you should find both of those.
And I also have a video on how to balance features, which of course includes features that are included as friction points. What do I mean by friction? I noticed that the person who asked didn't really define what he meant. So I want to talk about it so everybody's clear on what I'm talking about
Sure.
here. Friction is anything that, when you're playing, changes the pace or style or type of gameplay you're involved in. Maybe it slows it down, maybe it completely interrupts it.
I think that you could also You could also say divines or defines like usability. Like it's part of user experience, right? Friction is part of user experience, and sometimes the desired user experience can be friction. Take a look at From Software games, right? You're not intended to go in and beat every boss in one try. Of course, you can if you're pretty good or have a really OP build, but you're meant to slam your head against the wall a little bit because then it challenges you to think of different strategies and then rewarding that by beating the boss with different strategies or by learning the skill set or move set of a boss is a really good reward. It's a really good feeling. So they create that feeling carefully by designing bosses with ideally good hitboxes, good, what's the word? Attack. You know that what's the term for telling you oh god, it's right there on the tip of my tongue. For like readability of attacks and informing you that attack is about to come. Essentially attack patterns. It's right there. It's like choreography. It's, I don't know, telegraphing. Thank you guys. So good attack telegraphing is part of that too, where you feel like, okay, I know why I lost to that attack because I saw it coming and I didn't roll out fast enough. Now I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna roll out of the way. Conveying intent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are these intentional methods of slowing down the player? Yes, I would say that if you want, yeah, I mean, technically you could say that a boss that is you're meant to learn over time and it kills you is intentionally slowing down the player from progressing, but it's building you up so that you feel a little bit of frustration. But hopefully, if the attacks are telegraphed, you feel like they're fair, you feel like the hitboxes are okay, that all of that should combine so that you feel like you're making little chunks of progress here and there, here and there, here and there, until you can finally beat the boss after, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 tries. And, you know, that dopamine dump is going to be massive. You don't want to have the end fight, like, let's say, what was his? Consort Radahn. Arguably speaking, I think that as boss design goes, that was probably one of From Software's worst. It wasn't great. And I didn't feel rewarded when I completed it. I felt upset. I just felt mad. Like after, you know, an hour and a half or 2 hours of trying to beat him, it just wasn't fun anymore. And now I felt like I needed to finish it. I feel like Cuphead is a good example of what you're talking about. Yeah, I think Cuphead is really well made in that way too.
This could be anything from you're doing combat, but now you have to solve a puzzle, to you are exploring, but now you have dialogue with an NPC, to you open a loot container and
This is
there's
about
more things
pacing
in there you can
specifically.
carry, either because of weight or slots or whatever. And you have to stop. And rather than just take all and move on, you have to stop and evaluate what's in this container.
Yeah.
What am I carrying? All these are friction points in games. They're places where the pace of the game changes. It slows down, it speeds up, maybe it completely interrupts the player. One person's friction point is another person's challenge
He's right.
and another person's annoyance. So, like I mentioned, especially in the Encumbrance Part 2 video, there may not be a way for you to solve a design issue without some people in your player base loving it and some people hating it. In fact, I would say that almost every design feature of note, you know, yes, you could get nitpicky and say, well, then I think that the name I used on this tiny item that is only in there to serve as a lore deliverance, nobody really minded that. You're right. I'm talking about any major design feature probably has people who love it and hate it. And
Well, here's a good example that I can give, right? When you're designing a game, here's my NFT that you guys can steal. When you are designing a game, you're going to make a feature like this. It's a good feature, feels great. You're going to make another feature that is like this, let's say. Ignore verticality, I just want to separate the lines a bit. you are going to make another feature that feels like this. Now, your niche is right in between all of your features. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't make something that feels good for the people out in these areas, right? Of course, it can feel good, but the core of the game is meant for people that lie within this center part. And he's right. Every single design decision, every single feature you implement, it's all going to narrow it down a little bit more and more. Of course, that means that your target audience is a bit smaller. It is what it is, right? And sometimes some of these features are optional, right? Like maybe this yellow is the fishing mini game or something. It's not really that key to the game. Somebody can interact with it or not interact with it. Probably isn't going to modify the game too much, but it's there. Just know that you're never going to be able to satisfy everybody, and in an attempt to widen this as much as possible and to pull it apart and widen that audience, you can also result in a game that doesn't feel like it was really meant for anyone, or that it was meant for too many people to not feel like it had anything unique to say. Modern AAA games are like that, or they feel like that in a lot of cases. Like it was just meant to appease to too many people that it didn't actually feel like anything special. Screenshot it. You can get it. Don't worry. It'll be up on YouTube.
You probably can't come up with something that everyone's going to love.
No.
So,
but also I will say too that some of this can come down to player choices, right? That encumbrance can be mitigated by player choice, especially if it's encumbrance that can be the capacity of which can be enhanced by perks or skills. So sometimes friction points can come about from the choices you make, from the build that you have as a character. If you're a dialogue heavy character and not really meant for combat, yeah, combat's going to be the friction point, right? Because you're not really spec'd out for it.
I've mentioned that I've worked with people who seem to have their goal in life. They want all friction points removed. And that's not a bad idea. I've talked about how I thought World of Warcraft, coming to World of Warcraft from EverQuest, it felt like they took EverQuest and they sanded a lot of the friction points off. So, you couldn't lose your items when you died, and you didn't lose experience points permanently when you died. Things that EverQuest did that were really harsh, WoW just got rid of them. But I've worked with people who want most or all friction points removed. They don't want ammo in the game. They don't want encumbrance in the game, whether it's weight or inventory limits. They don't want any item restrictions. The fact that some games have classes and this item is only usable by this class, or even games without it. I've made games.
Here's the thing. Here's what I'll say is the difference. If it is a friction point that doesn't add anything to the game or doesn't challenge the player, I would say that it should try to be sanded down. For instance, if you have a game where Golden Chronicles, where you are expected to pick a lot of ingredients, should you have a animation to pick ingredients? Is the amount of immersion that it might add, is it really worth the absolute friction point that it's going to cause after the first 50 ingredients that you harvest? I don't think it's worth it, So it's not the same as ammo, where ammo weight can add some challenge. It can make you think about it. Or having ammo as a whole makes you think about what you need to buy for merchants, what you're available to sell, right? Because ammo that you don't plan to use can be used in the economy to make more money. I think friction points should be transient like boss mechanics, or static like ammo weight. I would say it even simpler. I would just say, in my opinion, friction points should have a purpose. I think they can be constantly present if they have a purpose, right? Like survival games. You often have to think about like eating, sleeping, temperature. Those are always present, but they have a purpose because you're playing a survival game. Your goal is to survive. Those metrics are your show how well you've done at being able to survive, right? So I think that friction points should have a purpose, and if you want them to exist and then have the player earn ways to mitigate them, so you're like stamina, like sprinting distance, for instance, is something that we can use here, and you can increase this by perks or by putting more points into endurance or wearing gear that augments your stamina. Just know that you are starting the player off in a position where it feels annoying to engage with stamina, which is needed to make the game feel like it is progressing faster, or in some cases making it feel like it is actually playable. So there is a balance where leaning too hard in one direction can make the game feel like it doesn't have any challenge or progression, and leaning too far in the other direction can make the game feel like it is just really annoying to play, like it is just not fun. And I think that Kingdom Come Deliverance, starting off as like a peasant, it kind of is too far in this direction where it just feels it's a little harsh. But once you get going, the game feels really good. Stamina's a bad example. Hydration might be better. Sure. I mean, I think that these both work. Is friction the same as features that make gameplay immersive? It can be, although I don't think it always is. Friction doesn't have to be an immersive thing. Some friction points may not have any relevance to your core loop.
Games where you have to have a minimum strength or you have to have a minimum dex in order to use an item. They want all those removed. They want no friction points whatsoever.
Here's the thing: if you have an item in your game, or you have items in your game that require minimum strength, minimum dexterity, and these are the two core pillars of most people's builds, is either they use melee weapons or they're really good with ranged weapons. You should just offer those choices, right? Because most players will kind of lean more heavily into one than the other. And if it's just the start of the game, and I know games that do this, Underrail is a good, isometric RPG that's like this, where they don't really give you any ranged options at the start of the game. And so if you don't take any melee points, the melee weapons that they give you at the start of the game, it just feels terrible. So you've severed off players' ability to make their own builds in an RPG where they're encouraged to make their own builds, and now that's going to cause a friction point at the start of the game. What I find difficult with game design is that everything seems so subjective. Everything is subjective. Yes, absolutely every single thing in game design is. Which is why I think that for people who don't think that way, and that it doesn't mean that you're dumb, right? Like, the most brilliant programmers I know have no ability to do game design because it's so opposite the way that they think and operate, especially with their programming. And it's just like, well, what's good and bad design? Well, it depends. It always depends. You can make any argument sound really smart if you word it well. As long as the words you're saying are easy to understand, in my opinion. Because I think that game design is about communication, right? We've talked about that. And if you say something in a way that is hard to understand for people, then you aren't doing your job effectively. Even if it makes sense to designers and your small group of designer friends, you need to say it in a way that makes it seem sensible to people who don't think in terms of how a designer thinks. Which is why, yes, sometimes I can get long-winded, but I also try to just break it down further and further. Tim's better than me.
In the extreme of that, I worked with someone once who only wanted action all the time. In fact, he said every fight in this game should be a boss fight. It shouldn't there should be no fight that only lasts 10 seconds. There should be no fight that doesn't have the player strategizing and using their different abilities and having to move. And I was like, this is where I first used a phrase, and I said it to him. Look, games should have ups and downs. They should have pacing changes. That's,
by the way, exactly hear how he discusses pacing in the game. And this is what a seasoned veteran designer sounds like, where he takes something that is actually complex of how to properly pace a game and he explains it in terms that are really, really easy for anyone to understand. People who might not even know games very well can understand that, well, yeah, pacing sounds good. Like, this is what a expert game designer looks like.
Look, games should have ups and downs. They should have pacing changes. That's why roller coasters are fun and monorails aren't. Because a roller coaster with no up and down is a monorail. People just use monorails for transportation.
It's a great way to put it,
They
by the
don't
way.
go, wee, I'm on a monorail. Woohoo. So, I think
It's a good analogy.
having pacing deltas are a good thing. Movies do it, books do it,
Yep.
games should do it. Now, this can depend on your game genre, though.
Remember, it
If you're
depends.
making a tactical game, all you have is combat. That's all you have. So you try to vary it up. You try to make different encounters that have different uses of your tactical abilities and have different pacing.
Though note that even games that are strategy focused, like think of XCOM. XCOM has time that you spend back at HQ between fights. There is still downtime, right? It is turn based, but even RTS games generally try to pace the AI, right? And it can even be a small ramp up, right? But then the game ends. The game ends after that ramp. You ramp up into the final battle. It's really intense, high action, high octane. That match ends. And then you have time to breathe. So, yeah, having a game that is just non-stop high octane can get you can often see players just getting really exhausted from playing it. Like they can only jump in for an hour at a time. And maybe that's what that market wants, is to jump in for an hour at a time and then take a break. But most of the time, you should have those ups and downs, like he says. Have those breaks in between fights where with NPCs talking, dialogue, etc. Pace the player.
But combat can be a challenge in an RPG. It's not all you have. You might be solving puzzles or talking to people. In a narrative game, a combat would be an annoyance. If you're like, I thought I was gonna just explore and talk to people and read stuff. I thought this game was sold to me as a narrative game, and now I'm fighting.
Yeah, the marketing depends on that too, like he says. Marketing is important. I mean, take a look at like Uncharted, right? When people play Uncharted, it's essentially modern Indiana Jones with Nathan Drake. And what do you think of Indiana Jones? You think story bit leads me into puzzle, which leads me into fight, which leads me into story bit, puzzle, fight. And that's really what most of Uncharted can be broken down into, is that combination of going from story, puzzle, fight, story, puzzle, fight, story, fight. You know, it's just that. And it works really well because you have time to breathe, you have time to take things in before all hell breaks loose and you are fighting while a plane is crashing or a building is burning down or a ship is sinking. Pace the player.
It's so you can't just point to any particular feature and go, that's a friction point. It depends on the genre.
Yes.
Now, when I originally started thinking about what I wanted to say, I just want to say, oh, by the way, with experience, you will discover that you don't have to wait until your game is fully completed.
Yeah, like we said, intuition, right? Design experience.
Think about friction points and how you're going to balance features. However, even if you don't have experience, I talked about all the stages that games go through. The prototype stage is the first time you can start looking at features and seeing how well they're balanced and what friction points you have.
Yep.
Because a prototype it may not look nice, it's a gray box, but a prototype is when you started adding those features in there. And as your prototype gets richer and richer, you can do that evaluation. By the time it becomes a vertical slice, where it's a chunk of the game that looks great, has the features you're going to ship with, it's just one level, but it's something that you can point to and go, this is exactly what the game will be like when we ship, then you can certainly evaluate friction points in a vertical slice.
You shouldn't be going from vertical slice to alpha production and saying, oh, it'll get better. It's going to improve from here. No, it's like, no. Now we don't move to alpha until our pain points, our friction points are exactly where we want them to be. Although, friction and pain we could say is a different thing. Let's use the term friction point. The friction points are exactly where we want them to be, and there aren't pain points in areas that aren't providing some benefit to the player. We'll have time to fix that later. Yeah, I've heard that too much. Hey, Madrong. Yeah, he's exactly right. Like intuition and experience can take you only so far, but design balance, design high level design is only going to take you to a certain point. You have to jump in and just see if that intuition was proven right or wrong. It's just that that's the first gate. The second gate is to prototype it, and then you can perform rapid iteration. And you should be able to say, okay, well, it's a little bit painful because the UI is not the easiest to see or mess with. Does that affect the feature, or does that affect the usability from a UI UX perspective? UI UX. Okay, so we can correctly assume that getting proper UI UX into this is going to improve the feature where the pain points lie, right? Because with like Golden Chronicles, I think the UI UX is a pain point, but it doesn't negatively impact the rest of the feature and how I enjoy, how I go about talking to characters and NPCs. It's really just that we need a UX designer to take a look at it and fix that up. That can be done later. So it's just, you have to determine what needs to be fixed now, what needs to be fixed later, and when is it too late to fix things. And usually at the end of your vertical slice, by the time that you're jumping into alpha, that's where you need to say, okay, is this exactly where we want it to be? Or do we need to just fix some things up in our vertical slice and reevaluate it? And that's really what it should be.
You do not have to wait until the full game is finished. You don't have to wait until the game ships.
You shouldn't
have to. You can do it right then. So, let me talk to you about how I managed.
Before he jumps in that, which is exactly why you take a look at a game like Gollum, and you're like, how the fuck did a game like this ever get this far? How did it ever reach shelves? Because the game is just full of pain points. It's full of negative friction points that frustrate the player that should never have existed. Gollum was great. What do you mean? And so, it's games like that where you have to think, okay, where did it go wrong? Was it not prototyped well enough? Were the designers just completely incompetent? Was QA not doing their job, reporting these as frustrating? It could be any one of these. It could be that the publisher was forcing bad decisions down the throats of developers and saying, well, we're not going to pay you unless you do this. Having worked with that publisher before, I wouldn't be surprised.
Let me talk to you about how I managed friction points, how I thought about them. I have a one-word answer to how you can balance them.
Okay.
And that is listen.
He's right.
Okay, bye. Okay, let me explain what I mean by that. Because what I mean by listen depends on what stage you are in making the game. I really highly recommend you watch the production stages video.
We have one too.
Anyway, early on, when you're doing brainstorming and design sessions for the game, listen to the other people who are at those sessions. They're going to bring up things that maybe they're worried about. Hey, we've got a lot of different weapons here with a lot of different ammo. That's a lot of ammo things to juggle. Maybe you reduce the ammo. Maybe you have light, medium, and heavy ammo. You don't go like, you got 5mm and 9mm and 10mm and 12mm, and maybe you just don't need to be that realistic.
And I think in this case, he means not just playtesters, but also developers, also other people. Just note that we talk about this, but I'll just reiterate. Your job as a game designer is not to be right. It is not to have ideas. That doesn't mean that you can't be right or that you can't have ideas, but that is not your job. Your job is to listen, to communicate, to blueprint, to be a mediator between the vision and the team, and to facilitate the best pipeline you can between those two things, to filter things out that's coming from this side that shouldn't be here, and to compare what's in the game to what's on this side. That's your job. So when somebody is, when a coder is playtesting, when an artist is mentioning things that they are worried about, that they think players might not like, or that they don't like after playtesting themselves, you need to listen. You can't say, well, I'm the designer. This is the way that it's designed. I think that this is the better way to do it. Just note that that is somebody that is communicating their pain points, their friction points with you, and that can be an indicator that that will be what players on the whole will feel when they are playing the game too. Be careful with your ego, and remember that you are not the idea guy. You are not paid to have ideas. You are paid to, in many cases, be a problem solver and communicator.
I remember I come down on the fun side over the realism side. So early on in brainstorming, listen to the people who are involved.
Yes.
Then later on, as the game comes together, listen to different team members. People might be playing the game. You always have a few people on the team, and I love this, who start playing the game as soon as it comes together. You have some people on the team that won't play it even after it ships.
True.
But for the people who are playing it as it comes together, listen to them. You can even ask them questions. Don't wait for them to come to you. If you notice someone's playing the game a lot because you hear them commenting about it, they leave Jira bugs and stuff, ask them, hey, how do you feel about this feature? How do you feel about this system mechanic? Ask them what they think about it and if they like the challenge or if they're finding it annoying.
And the reason I talk about squashing your ego is exactly because of this. You need to be approachable. I mean, we've heard the stories about Concord's development and how it had a toxic positivity workplace. That means that people weren't approachable because they were denying or in denial about the negative things about the game or red flags that were being raised. As a designer, I recommend you be the first person, as in many cases as possible, be the first person to raise red flags about your own design work, because it will indicate that you aren't afraid of talking about problems with your game, and other developers will be more likely to approach you and say those things because they'll know that, well, he's talking about problems all the time or issues that he sees that might come to fruition, so I think that he'll be receptive to this. You need to be receptive. You need to listen, as Tim Cain rightly points out. You can't be the type of designer that's like, I'm busy, I'm working, You need to set aside time to listen to these people, to talk to them, and like he says, go up to them and actually just ask them what they felt. Those pesky coworkers always creating bugs. It's just, look, it's tough working on a feature, it's tough working on a design, but you need to say, look, I just don't like, I don't like in Colden Chronicles that ingredient effects are perfectly known. I don't like that processing, in my effort to make it understandable, also kind of makes it lame. Like there isn't much magic to it. So, these are potential points that I see that players will play this and be like, it's kind of meh, right? So I need to be thinking about that, and I need to be receptive to people when they say, hey, I think that this part of your game is kind of meh. They're like, dude, I agree. It's shit. It's just bad. Like, it's just bad, and it needs to be fixed. You're not going to have the perfect solution to every design problem the moment you design something. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad designer, right? What indicates that you're a bad designer is if you can't communicate well, if you can't listen, and if you can't be open to learning so that you can better work with your teammates, right? Or if you maybe, worst case too, you may not be assertive enough. Like, being a good designer is about being just the right mix of assertive and a good listener. And you'll feel bipolar if you're doing it properly. You'll feel like, look, I know this is properly designed. I'm confident in it. This players are going to enjoy this, and this. So we need to just keep moving forward with it. But then the moment somebody says, well, wouldn't it cause this bug? You need to be like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, it would cause that bug. Okay, let's think of a different way to handle it then. So it's like you have to be defensive and assertive, but not to the point of being blind or incapable of admitting when you're wrong. And that is a daily challenge, I think, for every designer. And, a bad day at home or something, or, maybe you're feeling a bit depressed that day or something, that can change the way that you communicate. And you need to, in some cases, be very open with people, saying, today I'm not doing the greatest. I'm gonna work on some balancing bugs, if some balancing issues. If you want to talk about something design related, let's just do it tomorrow. When I'm feeling a bit better. And they'll appreciate that more than if you don't say that and they come to you and you bite their head off because you are, a bit tight in the panties that day.
This is especially true for QA. QA is so important for a game. There's this tug of war with QA. You want to get them on early, but the problem with getting them on early is they get jaded. So a year later, they're ignoring some of the stuff that bothered them early because they're like, it's been there for a year. They don't even see it anymore.
They do. So, every single person in QA who's anywhere near decent at their job they're some of the most jaded motherfuckers I've ever met in the industry. But I kind of like it though. It does get jaded on the other side of that as well. Yeah, but QA is special. Really good QA people are just jaded. If you have a toxic positivity issue in your company, probably the first people that are going to get fired are QA. They will say things bluntly. They'll say, this is shit. This has been shit for 3 months. This needs to be fixed. I'm tired of retesting it. Fix it.
So it's really important, especially as the game comes together, that you listen to your QA, and especially QA who are coming on fresh, that are
fresh
want to
eyes.
Get their first reaction to the game. Mm-hmm. What's their visceral gut reaction to the feature of this game?
Because they're not used to the 300 issue bug list that you have in Jira. Hopefully you don't have that, but if you do have that, they're not used to it, so they don't know that this is a feature. This is something that design said they weren't going to change, even if design should be changing it. So this is somebody that is just fresh, like, is this meant to work this way? Because it's kind of annoying. If only you knew how many open bugs we had. I've worked at the three. I'll just say this: the 300 open bugs on Jira is coming from personal experience. That's all I'll say, and it's the exact reason why Cauldron Chronicles and Microraptor will be implementing something called the zero bug policy, and I highly recommend it. And here's exactly what it means. Zero bug policy isn't about achieving bug-free software. The focus is on what's important, shipping quality software to the users. I recommend reading up on it. There are some really good articles that talk about what exactly that means. Now we're down to about 500. Just my team to delete over 2 years old, and it was a hard sell. No, and that's exactly actually what a zero bug policy is. That's exactly it. If the bug is old, just delete it. Literally just delete it. You can make it again in the future, but you need to trim it down and correctly analyze what is important to the quality of the product or the game in this case. And then work from there, right? And stop, don't put new features on top of half-assed code architecture. Fix the code architecture, fix the things that make it quality, that are going to trim tech debt in the future, and then you can start working on that shit. If it's that old and hasn't been fixed, then it either never mattered or it's obsolete. You're preaching right now, and I love it. You're absolutely right. And it could just be wasting time of QA because they have to keep that in mind and track it, or they might make a duplicate and now they have to update the old ticket. No, it's just delete it. Just delete it and rework your next few sprints to just fixing the shit out of these things.
Are they getting annoyed by? There are things where telemetry can really help.
Yes, it can.
Because there are sometimes people won't tell you something, but if you look at telemetry and you look at how people play, like where did they go? Where did they die frequently?
Yep.
Where did they quit? If there's some place in the game that's not a hub near a shopkeeper and people are quitting there a lot, you may have a rage quit moment and you may have to look into what's making people not want to play the game.
Yep, indeed.
Beyond QA, you can also do this with focus tests. Focus testers can help you because they're not professionals. They just tell you, I don't like this. It feels wrong. Now, this can hurt though if the focus test is put together badly. If you get together a bunch of people who like shooters and you have them focus test an RPG, you're going to get some bad feedback.
Yes, and I know I've mentioned it before. It's one of the reasons why you need to be careful about asking your friends or family to test your game. I know they're readily available, but you need to ask yourself too, is this tester actually in my target market? Is this somebody who would buy my game if this existed on the market? And if not, you're probably not going to get much that's useful from them. So just be careful, right? And also they're going to lie to my face. Yes, that absolutely that is also a worry. You need to get people who are going to tell you the truth. So just know, get people that are in your target market, because that's who are going to be excited about. That's the people that are excited about your game and are going to be the most sad if it doesn't live up to the expectations.
But if you get a good focus test of group together and they're playing your game and they play games like this, you will get some invaluable feedback about places in the game they got confused or annoyed or frustrated.
Here's a personal example. The train game that I worked on, in my opinion, it was marketed too heavily towards train simulator lovers. And it was marketed as being a hyper realistic train simulator. It was not hyper realistic. In fact, one of the very first sentences of the GDD says that it is a semi realistic train simulator. And our competing product and product of inspiration was Euro Truck Simulator. But we carefully identified that because more people drive cars than trains, that we needed to simplify controls even a little bit further so that people could jump into this in a casual way and just get the train moving forward rather than going through a 40 button realistic checklist. What did you expect? Most of the initial players were people who loved train simulators, and they were a bit hardcore. So a lot of the feedback they were giving us were things that we didn't want to fix because it was never intended to be in our game. They mean like semi trucks? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what if you look up the publisher of that game, you'll find some interesting coincidences of games that they published. Let's just put it that way. Too dumbed down. Yeah, I mean they said that, and I think that in some cases they were right. But I also think that the people who were our target market seem to very much love that it's felt like Euro Truck Simulator, but with trains. And that's exactly what we were going for. When are you going to just spill the tea? I mean, I talk about the game. The game was called Train Life. I think that there will be enough that says it there. And the game wasn't perfect by any means, by the way. There were plenty of decisions that I made that were not good for the end result from a design point of view. But I also feel like the game was mismarketed initially. I don't know if I have a copy of the old. I don't know if I have a copy of the old description that they had on there before a different product manager jumped in and fixed it. She did a very good job, but the initial description was not good.
And then finally, after your game ships, look at the reviews. We did this after Outer Worlds.
Read
look
reviews,
at what
listen
reviewers
to players.
frequently mention.
Yep.
If one reviewer mentions something out of 100, okay. But if 80 of them out of 100 mention it, that's something you want to look at.
I feel like we just talked about this too, but maybe not with Tim Cain, so I'll repeat it here because I don't know if it's on YouTube. He's exactly right. As a designer, you need to be very careful not to be overly reactive to problems that individuals in your community have. Again, just like with testers, you need to ask, is this person actually in my target market, or is this somebody who is stating that they're complaining about my game and they're giving feedback about my game, let's use that phrase. But are they actually somebody who likes this kind of game, or did they have different expectations of what the game was going to solve for them? And if one person brings it up, I know that it can be frustrating as a player to hear, we're going to look into it, right? But it usually, in a lot of cases, for a design problem means we've heard it from you. We need to see if more people are saying this or feeling this. Because I'm not going to make one change to the design to cater to you, the 1%, when 99% of players don't have this problem. it's just not worth it in that case. And if it's not something that I can easily add a gameplay toggle for, right, then it's just not worth it. And in a lot of cases, you have to consider that a gameplay toggle is not just work for the designers, but it can be work for the programmers to add it, to add the functionality, work from the UI team to maybe stretch out a UI or add in another, element. Then it's work from the localization team to add the localization for it, which is money. And then it's work potentially for sound design to add maybe a new sound for it if it's needed. And then it's work for QA as well. So it has to pass through, even one gameplay toggle has to pass through a lot of hoops that all add money and time where it just may not be necessary. Sounds like a you problem. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can happen. Don't even discuss fixing exceptions unless 100 plus individuals are experiencing it. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Just make it right the first time. So I don't know, it's a catch-22 where if you're a developer or you're a studio that wants to be very active with the community, which we do, you have to find a good way to balance listening to players and saying the right things so that they understand what you mean, where we need to verify if, better than saying we'll look into it, say we need to verify if more players are experiencing this problem, and if so, we can then talk about how we want to fix it and present that idea to the community to see if that's something that they'll be okay with. It's more words, it takes a bit more tact, but it is worth it, I think, in the long term, because players will understand what one problem can mean for you, especially from the terms of like money and time. Another one is time too. I know I'm getting a little bit off track here, but when developers say they're going to fix something, it doesn't mean it'll be in the next patch. In a lot of cases, you have a pipeline and you've already planned the next 2 to 3 sprints. It's like, okay, well, this will be added 2 sprints from now, which means that we expect if we can fix this within this sprint, it'll likely be in a patch slated for late November, right? And I think that stating that to players just helps give them a time frame for that. You plan sprints, that's wild. You're right about that too.
And those are frequently friction points. Now, some of them aren't. One of the things Outer Worlds, like one of the complaints was it was too short. Okay, that's something we can work on, but I wouldn't exactly call that a friction point. What you want to look at is people who thought
I liked Outer Worlds was
certain
short.
Items there weren't enough of them. They're like, if there's not enough ammo, or combat's too frequent, or there's a lot of combat with what are called it's a junkyard. I forget. It's when you have combat against opponents that aren't very interesting, but you have a lot of it. Look for reviews that mention that, and look at the frequency. That will tell you what you need to
fucking hate.
Look at
I hate
in your next game.
Pokemon, fucking Pokemon. I'm tired of doing battles with fucking bullshit mobs trying to move between 2 places.
Or even a patch or DLC to this game. Okay, I think that's all my advice on friction points. Padone, I hope this answers your question. And I hope this video and the other videos give you some insight on what you can do on your own game.
Yeah, that was a great video. Another great one from Tim on that one. We had a lot to say. I know I get off track a lot, but I think that sometimes people appreciate my yapping. It depends. How do you fix it? It depends. That's really what a lot of it comes down to, and that's just what working as a designer is like. You just have to kind of get through it. You have to trial, error, see what players don't like, why they don't like it, and then reformulate your theories or your goals around that, around your new work. So, I don't know. I don't think you can ever become a master at game design. You will just become more experienced about some of the right things to do and wrong things to do, but it is never a 100% failsafe. Some of the best designers in the industry still make a lot of mistakes. And you and I are no different. So if you like that, go give Tim a subscription and a like on that video. And if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, YouTube.